The battle on D-Day is small in scale compared to the rest of the war, only lasting 2 months, but it is seen as a great moment in history as the Allied forces' courage was tested when all the odds seemed to be against them. In the end, it was only the bravery of the men who fought and died there that made D-Day into a victory for the Allies. American and British troops were able to turn the tide against the Nazis in Western Europe when they successfully planned and executed a Normandy invasion on D-Day despite suffering heavy losses. The British joined with Canada and the United States to invade German-occupied France. D-Day began on June 6, 1944. It was originally planned to be on June 5, 1944, but due to bad weather conditions, it was pushed a day back. The British landed on beaches on the Normandy Peninsula, codenamed Golden Sword, with the Canadians landing at Juno Beach in Ligne-sur-Mer in Ouistreham. Behind these three beaches lay the French city of Caen, where both the Germans and later the Allies used the major roads for transportation. The Germans had very light defenses and fortified sand dunes along these beaches. The British were under command of Lieutenant Miles Dempsey. The main goal was to go through Ouistreham and Caen so they could link up with air support. Simon Fraser, the 15th Lord Lovat, commanded the troops on Sword Beach, and his brave assault on the beaches helped the British achieve their objective.
America had entered the war after the events of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. By 1944, Day, along with Canada and Britain, would execute Operation Overlord, which is also known as the D-Day operation on the beaches in Normandy, France, codenamed Omaha and Utah. And the Americans ran into entrenched German forces were able to come out of the battle victorious. The battle was important as it forced Germany into an unfamiliar situation, fighting a two-front war, as they had in World War I. This time, the Nazis were already losing against the Russians on the Eastern Front, and just as had happened previously, they would lose on both fronts, and effectively the war in Europe would end swiftly with the suicide of Hitler and the fall of Berlin. The war against Japan extended on well into 1945, before the Japanese finally surrendered after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings.
For Canada, 14,000 soldiers landed on Juno Beach. Another 450 were to drop behind enemy lines by parachute or glider. The Royal Canada Navy supplied ships and about 10,000 sailors. The Canadians who landed on Juno Beach were part of Britain's Second Army under the command of British Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey, who had served in North Africa and Italy, or overall British commander Bernard Montgomery. The Canadians Assault Force were the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, commanded by General R.F. Keller, and the 2nd Captain Armored Brigade, with Brigadier R.A. Wyman in charge.
Australia would aid in the war to help the Allies, and for the Normandy operation they would give 3,000 troops, many of whom were airmen serving for the Royal Air Force, which was serving mostly alongside Britain's brigade, and campaigns for aerial dominance against the Nazis. Over the English Channel, Australia's contribution was seen as small, but the number of troops, supply, and resistance in dominated airspace only played a big part for D-Day, but for the rest of the war, this continued effort would go into the rest of the war as well.
Thomas Valence, who was there later recommended. I was a rifle sergeant and followed Lieutenant Anderson off the boat, and we did what we could rather than what we had practiced doing for so many months in England. There was a rather wide expanse of beach, and the Germans were not to be seen at all, but they were firing at us rapidly with a great deal of small arms fire. As we came down the ramp, we were in the water about knee-high, and we started to do what we were trained to do, move forward, and then crouch and fire. One of the problems was we didn't quite know what to fire at. I saw some tracers coming from a concentrate emplacement, which to me looked mammoth. I never anticipated any gun emplacements being that big. I attempted to fire back at it, but I had no concept of what was going on behind me. There was not much to see in front of me except a few houses, and the water kept coming in so rapidly, and the fellows I was with were being hit and put out of action so quickly that it became a struggle to stay on one's feet. I abandoned my equipment, which was very heavy. I floundered in the water and had my hand up in the air, trying to get my balance. when I was first shot. I was shot through the left hand, which broke a knuckle, then through the palm of the hand. I felt nothing but a little sting at the time, but I was aware that I was shot. Next to me in the water, Private Henry G. Wilt was rolling towards me. "Sergeant, they're leaving us here to die like rats." I certainly wasn't thinking the same thing, nor did I share the opinion. I didn't know whether we were being left or not. I made my way forward as best I could. My rifle jammed, so I picked up a carbine and got off a couple of rounds. We were shooting at something that seemed inconsequential. There was no way I was going to knock out a German concrete emplacement with a .30 caliber rifle. I was hit again once in the left thigh, which broke my hip bone, and a couple of times in my pec. And then a bullet served my chin strap on my helmet. I worked my way up onto the beach and staggered up against a wall and collapsed there. The bodies of the other guys washed ashore, and I was one live body amongst my friends who were dead, in many cases blown to pieces.
By the end of August 1944, the Allies had reached Paris. Once it was liberated and the Germans had been removed from northwest France, this effectively concluded the Battle of Normandy. The Allied forces prepared to enter Germany, while they would meet up with the Soviet troopers moving to the east. The Normandy invasion began to turn the tide against the Nazis. It also prevented Hitler from sending troops to France to build up the Eastern Front against the advancing Soviets. The following spring of May 8, 1945, the Allies formally accepted the surrender of Nazi Hitler, and Hitler committed suicide a week earlier on April 30th.